Hi, Jasmine. Welcome to the Joyful Morning podcast.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm good, and I am just really grateful that you took time out of your day and week to spend some time talking to me and to share your story with
Sure.
with me and with us, the listeners. So, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you spend your days doing?
My name is Jasmine Wilson. I have been an elementary school teacher for the last few years, but I'm taking a year off just with everything that's happened, just to make sure that I'm in a good space mentally. And Another thing I've been doing is I started a YouTube channel called A Commentary on Grief, just to show people my process through my grief and sort of help other people in theirs, as best as I can. The things I've learned here or there, I hope that those tools help others in their journeys. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that um, what you're creating on your YouTube channel is doing that. I'm sure it's helping others, and I'm really grateful for that. And in the show notes for this episode, I'll make sure to link to your channel so everybody can go take a look at all the great things that you're producing over there. So. Um, all the great things you're sharing over there, not producing, but yeah, so I I'm I always say I'm excited to hear from you and from your story, but sharing stories of loss doesn't make me excited. So I need to come up with better phrases. I am grateful for you to be here and to share your story. But let's kind of start there. Will you share with us your story of loss and how you got to be here on the podcast?
So I lost my son April 1st, 2020, less than 48 hours after he was born. And it's still pretty unclear what all happened to him in the time that he was born. And they said that there were a few things they identified was like severe ventricular dysfunction and CMV, which is cytomegalovirus. And Even now, I still haven't had the heart to really go and research what some of those aspects mean because I'm just not there yet. But um, his story and the things that I've gone through in this process has inspired me to help other people in theirs and try to be a better person every day. So
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing, and I don't know if this is helpful for you. I had a guest on the podcast who her daughter passed away recent, very recent after birth, and it was from things that they didn't know about leading into her being born. And she was able to meet with the doctors sometime later. The doctors actually um, presented that to her, and she said that that was one of the most helpful things. So I don't know if that is helpful, something that would be helpful to you. And I don't know.
I've talked to the group of doctors that were working with him while he was in the NICU, and they were amazing. They did the best they could with the information that they had. I had just moved back to the States from Spain, and the doctors there didn't really know anything was wrong until it was too late.
Mm.
So they did the best they could, and I'm not upset that they couldn't find out sooner what was going on. It just sort of happened, and yeah, I mean, I try to get more information on what happened with him, especially from blood results and things like that. But there wasn't much that they can glean from it. So
Yeah,
that's where
that's
we
got to be so hard. And I'm going to throw this question on you. What would you say to a mom who is in a situation like that where there aren't answers? I
are.
mean, now let's just be real. None of us we don't get to control life and death. I don't even have answers for why my son died. They would label it as SIDS, which means it's not identifiable. Like, we don't know why. But I'm curious what you would say to a mom who has no answers for why this has happened. And there's I can think of lots of scenarios, maybe a mom who's had recurrent miscarriages and they don't know why, or some kind of um, abnormality that isn't genetic and they don't have any answers for, or a case like my son who died in his sleep, there was no answers. So I'm curious what you would say to a mom who's doesn't have answers.
You know, I'll answer later in the next question I think you had about faith, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with this. When I was in the hospital, God came to me and said that he was going to call my son home soon.
Mm.
I didn't get any explanation. I didn't know why it was going to happen. He just said to lean on me. And when you're going through something, you don't know what's happening. Sometimes it's all you can do. And prayer and trying to make sure that you are leaning on God as much as possible so he can walk you through that process is the most important thing that you can do in that time. I still don't have a perfect relationship with God. Sometimes I still get angry. And I think most moms do because we still don't quite understand, this is my baby. You took him from me. What does it mean? But, it does get better.
Yeah.
It's not always a sad thing. So, all in all, you just have to lean on him. That's all you can do.
Yeah. And I would just say, none of us have a perfect relationship with God, right? We're all, that's why he's better because he is working on all of us. But his love for us isn't dependent on our love for him. And so, of course, there's anger, and of course, there's doubt. Of course, there's frustration. And that's one of the things I like to just expose on here, the reality of that, because I think if a woman is in kind of a situation like I was in, where I grew up in the church and thought that my faith was very strong, and then my son died, it brought a lot of questions to the table about who God was, and did he really love me, and how could a good God allow this to happen? So many questions that after years of kind of searching through those, I realized he's okay with us asking those questions and seeking him out in that. He's not disappointed or frustrated. Yeah. And we could talk about that all day, but
yes.
yeah. So, yeah. Tell me what has surprised you about this grief journey.
I would actually feel guilty about feeling joy.
Yeah.
I wanted desperately to feel joy and happiness, in spite of my grief. And then when I did, I was like, oh my God, I am betraying my son's memory. And that's not the case. It's so important. Like, even when you have children that are living, you are a source of joy for them. And even though they're gone, they still want you to be happy. So you can't let that invasive thought of, oh my God, I feel guilty for this, take control. You have to dismiss it and let yourself feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. I've said this again, I feel like a broken record sometimes on this podcast, but I've said this a lot, that for me, I remember the very first time I laughed after my son died, I almost felt sick to my stomach, like I had committed this act of betrayal, and that is something that is very surprising. I would have never anticipated it. And those around me who had never walked through anything like this couldn't really understand that feeling, that I felt that guilt over joy. So that's very interesting that you brought that up. I can definitely identify with that. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
the listeners can too. Yeah.
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 It's a tough one. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. You are still like, this is very fresh. Yeah. He was born April 1st. Yes.
He was born March 30th. He passed April 1st.
Okay. I feel like you have a unique kind of even perspective because of having a baby during the season of COVID. And I've had just this like special, not special, excuse me, this very real kind of heaviness and weightiness on my heart and my mind for women who are walking through this season right now, um, and having experienced the loss of a baby, because it already feels so lonely.
Yeah.
And then to be walking in this season of COVID, where it actually, like, I feel like piles on the grief. How has that, again, I'm throwing this question on
Okay.
you, I'm sorry. You're great though. So um, how how has that aspect of it been? You know,
Mm,
I mean, you don't know anything else. So
yeah. So, for me, my pregnancy was a very lonely time for me too.
mm,
And, a lot of people who have experienced pregnancy might have experienced loneliness as well. But, my partner at the time, he was still in Spain. He wasn't able to come over right away. And right after I moved back, the borders closed. So he wasn't able to come over.
oh my
So
God.
it was another layer of loneliness for me. And being in the hospital, only having one person be able to come in and things like that, it's really hard for me to deal with the news I just received about my son, on
Mhm.
top of just trying to heal. So, it's a very alienating process, and it's just, you have to take it moment by moment, a lot of deep breathing, a lot of prayer. Even now, sometimes I will still have anxiety. Sorry, I live in the city. A lot of anxiety and things like that. And I have to remember to sort of ground myself and remind myself that I'm really not alone,
Mhm.
despite what's going on in the world. So I lean a lot on my family and things like that. So it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it is totally normal for you to feel like that layer of anxiety, like your whole world, like, kind of came undone, you know, in the middle of the whole world coming undone, you know? So I think that that's totally normal, um, and just really hard. I'm really, really sorry that you've had to walk through this.
Day by day.
Um, what wisdom would you give to a mom who's just kind of entered this grief journey? What do you wish you had known about grief or life after loss? Um,
For me, I would say don't rush your grief process. Don't rush your journey. A lot of times we assume that we're supposed to have a time frame to our grief. It's not realistic. You're going to force yourself to go through certain things that are necessary. You have to give it time and be patient, be kind with yourself. This is not something that happens every day. You have to learn yourself as well, because it's a totally new thing. You have to give yourself time. You have to be kind.
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. I think we live in a culture that doesn't. We want to rush everything. You know,
Mm,
we want to be like to the next step, and we really don't have a grasp of what it's like to sit in painful circumstances, much
yes.
less, the pain of losing a child. And so I think we're so uncomfortable with that we do have this like desire to kind of rush through it. um, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in sharing with a mom to say, there's no time frame, you don't have to rush through this. I also think this thought just came to me. I was while I was talking, I was thinking about my own grief journey. I think it's it's like there's a lot of fear that that pain will never end, and that, or like the weight of that pain, the heaviness of those early days, and so you just want to get through it. And so I think if you can hear me, who's just a little bit further down the road, a few years ahead, to say it won't always feel this heavy. And so there's no, you don't have to rush through it. Like tomorrow might feel a little bit lighter, and then the next day and the next day. But just do today, do the next minute, do the next hour, knowing that at some point it will feel a less heavy, less as like suffocating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you wish that somebody, so if there's a friend or family member listening who loves a grieving mom, what do you wish that they knew or understood about grief or life after the loss of a baby?
Mm. So I did a video on this a while back for grief and relationships, and I think the most important thing for me was it's okay to not know what to do or
Mm,
say.
yeah.
Sometimes all you have to do is ask. We might not know how to articulate it in the perfect way, but we have an idea of what we need.
Mm,
For me, I just needed someone to sit with me for the most part. I mean, I didn't know what to say, I didn't know how to respond, anything like that, but just sitting with me and knowing that I had that presence with me, that was the biggest thing for me at the time. And it helped me process sort of those feelings of loneliness, especially during COVID. It's really hard for me to manage, but I got through. And also just don't tell your loved one that they're gonna get over it. They'll
mm,
move through it because it's a process and it'll always be part of them. That person that they lost is gonna be a part of them for the rest of their lives, and that's okay.
yeah.
But they will move forward. They just won't get over it. They'll move forward.
Yeah. I love the way you distinguish those two things, not getting over, but moving forward. They are two separate things. Yeah.
Yes.
Like we move forward, but my son is still an everyday part of our life.
Always. He's right behind me. Like he's always
I,
with me.
I
So
love that.
mm.
What is his name?
Makaya Yanda.
Oh, such a beautiful name. So
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And yeah, our babies are with us. We don't, we don't forget them. We don't get over them. Um, yeah. Yeah. I love that you distinguish those two. And I think that's very helpful for somebody listening who's like, I really love, my friend or my family member who's going through this, and I want to help her so badly, but I have no idea what to do. And to hear, it's okay, you don't know what to do. Just be there. Just sit with her. I think there's so much freedom in that and so much wisdom in that answer. Yeah. Um, Tell me how, kind of speaking of, you pointed to his things behind you.
Yeah.
How are you choosing to remember or honor or celebrate him in your like daily life?
So I have this journal right here. So in this memory box, I have this journal where I write to him. I think that's probably the biggest thing that helped me through my
Mm,
process because I didn't always know what to say or how to articulate how I was feeling. And being able to write to him made him feel more connected to me, despite him not physically being here with me. Um, and then if I had a very overwhelming night or something like that, his toy elephant back here,
mm,
I call him Bubba because I used to call him Bubba all the time. And I would, just have him nearby. Okay, he's close. Not to worry about, feeling like I'm alone or anything like that. So those two things were really big for me. And I don't know how you feel about symbolism and whatnot, but dragonflies have been a very big symbol for me.
mm,
Um, if I'm feeling overwhelmed or something like that, I'll see a whole lot of dragonflies around me. They sort of surround. And I'm like, okay, that's Makai. He's there with me. He's walking with me. He's flying around.
mm.
So those are a couple of things. I know you mentioned one. I'm sorry, but
Oh, I love it. I love that. And I love that you mentioned, well, I loved a few things that you mentioned, um, that you journaled. I remember my son Aiden's first birthday, and
mm,
I wrote, that may have been like, that wasn't the first time I had written to him, and I didn't have a specific journal. I wish I had. I wish somebody had told me, like, you would want to do this. That's like one of my biggest kind of regrets looking back, is that I didn't journal right away. There were things that I thought I would never forget that I forgot.
oh yeah,
It
all the
just,
small
so
things.
I wish I had journaled early on. But I had started blogging long time ago. I think it would have been like 6 or 7 months after he passed that I wrote kind of like a first letter to him. But on his birthday, I try to do that every year, at least write a letter about how he still is impacting me, and tell him about his brothers and his sisters, and it's a really sweet tradition. And I think um, for us moms with babies in heaven,
Mhm.
we want a tangible way to mother here, right? And
Right.
writing a letter, I mean, maybe that doesn't feel very big, or I don't know. It is such a powerful thing to do. And so I would encourage anyone listening who maybe has never tried that to pull out a journal, go get a new journal and begin writing these letters, and just see kind of what a special thing that will do in regards to even to your grief journey.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that was awesome. And then yeah, symbolism, I don't know how all of that works, but I do think that God is big enough to bring us
Mhm.
reminders of his love for us in
Right.
tender and sweet ways. Um, that's a prayer that I pray for the women listening here, or if I get an email or a message from somebody who has said, like, I'm really having a hard time, a specific prayer I pray is that God would remind them in a tangible way how much he loves them and cares for them. And if showing you dragonflies does that, like, I'm saying God cares so much for you. Like, he wanted you to know in that moment that he loves you. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. And like I said, I don't know how all of that works, but I
I think
believe that
it's
God is
so
big enough
good.
to move and act in any way that he chooses. So,
It's true.
um, and you mentioned that you have, I think, an elephant for him.
So
Yeah. And I just think that is so special for us. We had um, his baby blanket matched his older brother's. So my son Aiden's.
Mhm.
And now my oldest son, sleep still. He would be so embarrassed if I said this out loud because he's 13 now. But for sure, he still has he has both of them. He sleeps with both of them, and he knows which one is Aiden's. And it is just a really sweet thing. So it's not even in my, like, these things that we choose to honor or celebrate in within our daily life become not just a part of our story, but even the story of those around us. So for me,
Mhm.
it's with my oldest son, a way for him to still love his brother. Just really special. So
It's amazing.
I know it really is. One time we thought we lost the blanket, and it was
Mhm.
just, I mean, we turned this house upside down, upside down. We knew it wasn't, like, it couldn't have gone very far,
Yeah.
but for sure. Anyway, that is the danger of things, right?
Yeah, it's okay. It's
Yeah,
all right.
yeah. Um, Tell me one way that you, again, this is very fresh, and so as the years come, you're going to be able to answer this question differently. But
Right.
as of now, what is one way that you have grown or are growing as a result of your son's life, and now life after loss?
Mhm.
How has he impacted the way you see the world?
Patience.
Mm,
As an elementary teacher and even as a mom, you have to have a certain level of patience for children, right? But I didn't have much patience for adults. I didn't have patience for my loved ones not understanding what I was going through. I didn't even have patience for myself because remember, I had that invisible timeline to grieve and get over what I was going through, and that just wasn't realistic. And my impatience towards my loved ones made me blind to realizing that they had things going on in their own lives that I wasn't aware of, that they might have not have talked to me about because they didn't want to impede on what I was going through, and that wasn't fair. So I've done a lot of self care, a lot of introspection of how I've been managing my process and how to move forward and be a better friend, a better loved one to those around me, and being a better person to myself.
mm,
So definitely patience.
yeah. I feel like that was a very gracious response towards your family. Um, and I try to encourage the listeners that to just be reminded that for the most part, the people around us do love us. They just, like you said, they have their own stuff going on. Um, for people very close to us, it's helpful to be reminded that they're also grieving. Like my mom lost a
Right.
grandson. She's grieving as a grandma. My mother-in-law is grieving as a grandma. My sister-in-law is grieving as an aunt. And so like they're also grieving. So it's not as easy as I'm the only one grieving. That's not necessarily true. They're just grieving differently. And then to choose to believe that they want they want to do and say the right thing, they just don't know how. And so
Right.
giving people kind of the benefit of the doubt instead of like getting angry and bitter and frustrated, which just adds burdens to our grief, right? um, just choosing to say, I believe that they had my best intentions or the best intentions at heart, my best in mind, and I think that that goes a long way in regards to our journey of grief. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's not easy though.
No, because I'm pretty sure I was angry with quite a few people starting out. And it was like, why aren't you here? Why haven't you called me? Da, da, da. And I really had to take a minute and say, okay, maybe I don't have the best response right now. I need to take a breather, a couple deep breaths, and then come back to the situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very hard to do, but it's
Yeah,
important.
exactly. Yeah. And you kind of mentioned this earlier, but um, tell me what your faith has looked like amidst grief.
A roller coaster. Okay. I don't know if you read my story of loss on Facebook. Um, and just talking about, just the events that led up to him losing or passing. And it was just a very trying time for me. In the beginning, I was just, I was all in. Um, and, sometimes when you are dealing with something so painful, it's so easy to lean on to God because it's all you have.
Hmm.
But when the anger and the confusion sets in, it's just like I'm essentially screaming at him. I'm like, I don't understand why. Like, this is my only child. I don't get it. I need to understand. So, it took a long time to even get back to um, the relationship I had before
Yeah.
because I was just so blinded by the pain that I was dealing with and not knowing how to even pray for what I needed. Um, so it's been a process. As I said before, it's not perfect, but I think I'm getting in the right direction
Yeah.
um, in my walk with him. So
I think it's totally normal, like you said, even to not know how to pray or what to pray because there's so much finality in
mm,
death, right? Like, well, what am I supposed to pray for now? Um, at least that's what, like, the thing I want, you can't do, like, what else am I supposed to pray for? I get
mhm.
real, oh gosh, my my poor husband's probably like, Ashley, that is not a
It
very
is true. Yeah,
correct
that's how you
response.
feel. But it happens to all of us for
Yeah.
sure.
But I think those early days, especially not quite knowing what to pray,
Mm-hmm.
that is very real. Um, I remember a friend recommending just opening the Psalms and reading the Psalms out loud and using that as like a prayer to God. And what's helpful about that is that you're repeating God's words back to him. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and because we know it's in the Bible that it's okay to pray these crazy prayers like I've mentioned here before. Psalm 77 is amazing. It gives so much freedom because he's like, David is praying and he says, I think it's David, I don't know. He prays this prayer and he says, he's like calling God out. He's like, have you forgotten to be gracious to me? Like, I'm sitting here in just the worst case scenario and I feel forgotten by you, God. And he's like saying all these things. And what that does for us now is it gives us the freedom to pray these prayers, um, just very honest
Mm-hmm.
prayers, right? Of like how we're actually doing. And then we ask
Um,
God to just fix it, you know, fix our hearts and eyes on him and bring healing and joy. Sorry, I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, you're okay, because it reminded me of the story of Job. Remember that he lost everything. He lost
Yeah.
his family, he lost his house, he lost everything. So it brought that story to mind when you were mentioning him in Psalms. So that's all I was going to say. But you
Yeah.
good.
You know what's interesting about Job? I studied out Job a few years ago.
Mm,
Um, so Job, like the whole middle part of the book, his friends are terrible. I think I was reading a commentary on Job, and the guy who had written the book said he called them just the worst kind of grieving friends. Like they were just terrible. But there's all this back and forth in the middle of the book, and then Job finally answers, and he just goes after God. He's asking all these questions, like all the kind of natural questions that
mhm,
we would ask when we're suffering. What's very interesting is that when God responds to him, he doesn't reprimand him for saying some of those things. He responds with this answer of, this is who I am.
mhm,
Like God says, listen, Job, like, where were you when I put the stars in the sky and put the sun, where were you when I was creating all of this? Like, basically, God doesn't reprimand him for feeling all of those feelings and even asking all those questions. He just reminds Job who he is. And so I think, and even in Psalm 77, we see that there's this shift where the author of the psalm is like crying out to God, these like what I would say are audacious kind of prayers, very bold in their terminology. And then it shifts into this, he's reminding himself of who God is. He starts reminding himself of God's character. And
mhm,
I think that's a good place to aim for, in the middle of our anger and frustration, and yeah, all of those awful moments where we feel like our faith is gone. We can cry out to God, and then we can ask him to remind us of who he is in the middle of all of that, remind us of what we know to be true.
mhm.
I think he'll do that. I think he's big enough to do that. So yeah.
That's a great tip. I haven't really looked into reading Psalms. I think I'll definitely try that out soon because I'm always looking for ways to get closer because, like I said, it's not a perfect process, it's not a perfect relationship. So I definitely want to look into that. Thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That was what, the morning after my son died, we left the hospital, and part of our story is just that it's so bizarre. Like, you leave the hospital without a baby, and like your whole life has changed, and we gathered, like, I went to my in-laws house, from the hospital. I knew I couldn't go home. It felt like too hard because, you know the last time I was there, I had a baby, and now he was gone. Um, so we went to my in-laws house, and my husband's a pastor, my father-in-law is a pastor, and so um, within very little amount of time, everyone in our church knew what had happened, and they just started gathering at my in-laws house. And nobody said a word. I mean, what do you say, right? Um, and I remember a little while passed, and someone just opened the Bible and just began reading Psalms out loud. That's all that was said. And someone would read a Psalm, and then they would pass it to the person next. And this went on for hours. And to this day, it's one of the most amazing, like, moments where I can see that God was already working. I mean, that was just hours after my son had died, and he was just saying, I'm here, like, I'm gonna get you through this, like, you're gonna be okay. um so it's just a really special thing. So I would say, like, there is so much comfort to be had in the Psalms. So if you don't know where to start, that's a great place. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. You were just the sweetest, and I kind of want you to go back to teaching, because I just think that you were like would be the best teacher. Like, I just feel like you're just the sweetest, and I could talk to you all day. But uh,
Thank you.
as we kind of wrap up our time together, I would love to know if you have any kind of final words of encouragement for another mom who's walking through the loss of a baby.
Be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself and everybody around you. And remember that your baby's life is just as important now as it was when you were expecting. It's okay to include them in every part of your life. You should.
Mm,
Um, for me, I feel that it is our responsibility to ourselves and to our angels to be the very best versions of ourselves. So, I try to make an effort to do that every day, and I hope that those who are listening will find ways to do that for themselves.
mm. Yeah. You were I just have really loved talking to you.
Well,
So
thank you. I enjoyed talking to you too. Thanks for having me.
yeah, this is really amazing. For those of our listeners who would love to get connected with you and to listen to your processing through grief on your YouTube
Mhm.
channel, and I'll have this in the show notes for this episode. But for those just listening, where can they find you?
You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at a commentary on grief. They all have the same name, so it'll be fairly easy to find. If you just find the YouTube, you go to the page, I'll have the links there on the main page. So definitely come check it out.
Yeah,
I'd love to pour a little love into you, and
yeah,
we'll go from there.
perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this episode was a blessing to you today. Until next time.